Hi, welcome to this week's Dragonblade Authors Unplugged. I have some of my favorite authors here this week. We've got Mary Lancaster, Shana Galen, Jillian Eaton, and Emily Royal. Ladies, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Of course.
You're very welcome. So we're going to dive right in. We'll start with Jillian's book, which is The Lady Courts of Marquess, and it's book 2 in the Ladies of Seduction series. And this is Dragonblade Flame, is that right?
It is, yes, which means it's a little bit spicier, I think, than just kind of their standard book. So there are definitely some more passionate elements kind of woven throughout, which I let readers know right from the name of the series, Ladies of Seduction. But yeah.
Well, it's cold outside, so steamy book seems like a good idea. Can you tell us about the book and a little bit about the series?
Yeah, so kind of the number one overarching theme of the series is that it's about 3 separate couples. Book 1 and book 2, they're sisters. And all of the books start with the couples already married. I feel a lot in my own romances, that's kind of where books end. But I was interested in kind of as a married woman, of exploring the theme of kind of either finding love after marriage, since a lot of marriages in the Regency era weren't necessarily love matches. They were marriages of convenience or arranged marriages, and the love, hopefully, sometimes it didn't, came after. Or the idea where maybe once they were happy, but something has happened and they no longer are. So in this series, in both book 1 and this book, The Lady Courts of Marquess, which I'm glad that you said the title first because I never know how to pronounce it. We meet Kitty and William, and they've been married for about 1.5 years, and she wants a divorce, which obviously is incredibly extreme in England at that time and not really a thing. But she's desperate enough that this is what she wants. And I won't say hate, she strongly dislikes her husband. They are not in a good place anywhere but the bedroom is the one place that they get along, which kind of brings in the steam element. So they definitely have a strong physical connection, but they're completely apart emotionally. And a couple things have happened to bring them to this point. And there's a few flashbacks throughout the story that kind of unveils, what has brought them here? Why are they so far apart? Is this something that they can fix? And what do they have to change to kind of find their happily ever after, because they're already married?
Yeah. I love the idea of starting with a married couple too, because you have like a different layer of intimacy that way. And there's especially right. In a flame book, you can do so much more. So awesome. And there's one more after this.
There is one more that I'm writing right now, The Countess Kisses a Rogue. And same thing, it's a couple, they are married. The heroine is actually an American doctor, which I've never written before, which has been a lot of fun. We meet her very briefly in book 1. She shows up a little bit in book 2. So she's kind of a brand new character, which is also fun. She's not related to the first 2 characters who I said were sisters. And she was betrothed to her husband when she was an infant through a marriage contract. And her mom took her to America because she didn't agree with it. And she kind of met her husband once when they got married, and then she ran away to London to escape him. So he has recently come back to London. He's a very well-known earl, and he is trying to track her down.
Oh, cool. Well, I love the setup for the whole series. I love the idea of the married couples and that exploring that kind of intimacy and the heroines that don't stay put. So
right. Yes.
Awesome. Well, the next book that comes out this week was 21 Days with the Lion, and that's Shana Galen's book. Obviously Lion's Den book. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
So this book is focusing on the younger sister, and it's kind of a play on The Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare. So in The Taming of the Shrew, you've got 2 sisters. You've got the older one who is the shrew, and then you've got the younger one, Bianca, who is sweet and loving and kind, and everyone, loves her. And I mean, if you read the play, you know that maybe she is, maybe she isn't. So in this book, the book starts with Bianca about to be abducted again, because she has this large dowry. Her father has said, your older sister has to marry first. Nobody wants to marry the older sister. So these impoverished younger sons keep trying to kidnap her so that they can marry her and get the dowry. And so finally, her father's had enough. And he says, we have to go see Mrs. Dove-Lyon at the Lion's Den. We've got to get you a husband. And that's basically how the story starts. They choose, Mrs. Dove-Lyon chooses a man who she thinks will work. He is not at all open to marriage. And in fact, since Bianca has had so much of her agency taken away, they have Mrs. Dove-Lyon and Bianca have a private conversation where she says, you know what, this is your choice. If you want to marry him, you've got 21 days to decide and you need to propose to him. So it kind of, it kind of gets her choice of whether or not she wants to marry him or not. So they go off to the country. He thinks he's being her protector. He doesn't really think that he will be any good at that. He's got some issues from his past and some things that he's failed at, and he feels like maybe he's not up to this, and it goes from there. And of course, since I've written Bianca's story, I couldn't leave Kitty, and she is Katerina from the Shakespearean story. And her story is called Kiss Me, Kitty, and that actually will be out in the A Duke by Any Other Name anthology from Dragonblade, which comes out on Valentine's Day, February 14th. So that's a little short story that I have, and there's other authors, Grace Burrows, Sarah Bennett, Catherine Bone, other authors in that too. And my selection is then Kitty's story. So if you read Bianca's story, then you can pick up the anthology and read what happens to Kitty, because they're connected. They're kind of happening with an overlapping timeline. And of course, Kitty's the shrew. You know, she's horrible, awful, throws things, screams at people. But then in that short story, I kind of go into, why is she like this? You know, what has happened to her? And is there a man who could possibly understand why she's like this and help to make her feel like she doesn't have to act like that anymore. So
awesome. Well, you segued really beautifully into Duke by Any Other Name, which comes out again, as you said, on Valentine's Day, and you want to grab it, like you want to grab all the other ones because it is a great deal, and we'll give you like little like it's like a box of chocolates but with stories, you know, little tastes of stories. Awesome. Well, the next book that came out this week is Mary Lancaster's book, and it's Evidence of Evil, which doesn't sound
not romantic.
It's not very romancy, but it's book 2 in The Silver and the Gray, and this is slow burn. Is that right?
Yes, very much so.
Same couple the whole way through.
Yeah, the first book was Murder in Moonlight, and that's where excuse me, where the couple really met. They had met before that briefly, but that's sort of covered in the prologue. But they're a slightly different couple. There's neither of them belong to London society. It's set in Victorian era in England, and they meet at a country house in the previous story. She is a courtesan. Well, she calls herself a courtesan, but in fact, excuse me, I've got a tickle in my throat.
Time of year, there's so much crud going around, I think.
She's actually the madam of a brothel, a very upmarket brothel in Mayfair. So she's quite notorious, but only the men recognize her, obviously, because they don't acknowledge her in front of their wives. So she's sort of definitely outside normal society. And he is the son of a plantation owner in Jamaica, and his mother was a maroon. They called them maroons. They were basically escaped slaves in Jamaica, and she married his father, and he is the result. But with the abolition of slavery, of course, things all changed, and the plantations didn't make any money, so he's making money elsewhere now. But in that sense, he is an outsider too, because he's not entirely like everybody else in England. So they have that in common, but not much else, because he's ultra respectable and wealthy, and she is very much sort of demi-monde. So in Evidence of Evil, they've already solved one mystery together, which they had to basically because they were suspects, chief suspects being the outsiders at this country house where they
You
had
don't
both.
have a choice.
Well, she'd lied her way in, and he was. Well, he had a business of his own. He's got a long lost brother who vanished in Jamaica, and he thought there might be a clue to the owner of the house. Anyway, that's a different story. I'm getting away from the matter in hand. In Evidence of Evil, it's a friend of Constance's who used to in fact stay in her house, but now has managed to marry a baronet who is a magistrate as well, and has a nice country house out in the country. Where else would it be? So she is being accused of murder, and she goes to get help from Constance, because Constance helped her before when she was in trouble. So Constance, who has been missing Solomon, she goes off and finds him and persuades him to come with her. But the only trouble is they have to pretend to be married because her friend's husband is very puritanical and doesn't want, he wouldn't welcome an unmarried lady or a widowed lady traveling with a gentleman who's not related to her at all. So they pretend that they're married. So they have to share all that going on as well. But in fact, they are just friends with definite attraction going on. So they basically have to prove that Constance's friend did not murder this girl, who is not quite what she seemed anyway. There's all sorts of secrets that have to come out, and different people that they start suspecting who might have been involved. And hopefully nobody guesses until the end, but eventually, of course, they do find it, and I won't say they live happily ever after, but they go on to the next story where the romance between Solomon and Constance will continue, I hope.
I love that. I'm so enamored with mystery right now, and that idea of like being able to lose yourself in a story and having to guess alongside with the main characters, and then that slow burn romances. It's just like,
I find it really fun, actually. So.
Yeah. Awesome. How many more books are there in this series?
There are 5 altogether, so there'll be another 3.
Cool. So they have plenty of time to get to that first kiss thing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, the last book that comes out this week is Emily's book, and it's Heartbreaker of the Ton, and it's book 6 in the Misfits of the Ton series. Can you tell us about this one?
Yeah, so it features Juliet, who was the nasty sister from book 4 in the series. So Juliet, she's like really, really pretty. Her parents are wealthy, so she's kind of got everything that society would expect her to have. But her dad was a commoner, and she's desperate to marry a title. But she's like really, really vain, and she's stomped on the hearts of lots of men. And before her own story starts, is she did something unspeakably awful to her sister, who was the heroine of book 4, which backfired really horribly. So she's now this kind of total pariah. And even her dad, who's like a really kindly man, just says, "I'm very disappointed in you." And we all know as children what happens when our parents say, "I'm not cross, I'm disappointed."
It's the worst thing ever.
So she's got the kind of censure of the whole of society and the disappointment of her father. But she tried to seduce this horrible sort of lecherous duke into marriage because she was desperate for a title, and that backfired on her as well. So she's now she's got a child now by this duke, totally abandoned by everyone. Her ambitious mother has said to her, "You've got to get rid of the child," but she decides, actually, no, I've got to keep the child. She has a bit of an epiphany, and she realizes, actually, I've been a bit of a stinker. I've got this child, but because society is just not accepting of a single mother, she runs off with her tail between her legs, and she hides in this remote country village by the sea, which is actually where her sister was forced to run to after Juliet practically destroyed her in book 4. So she turns up at this village, and she masquerades as a widow because she's actually now really ashamed of what she did. She just sort of realizes, look, I've been a total cow. I need to actually be kind because I've got this baby and I adore this baby, and he is kind of my salvation. But she's gossiped about in the village, this sort of mysterious young widow who rocks up with a son and a London accent. She doesn't fit in. She's a bit of an incomer. She hasn't got the local accent, total outsider. And anyone who moves into a village will sort of realize that's just what villages are like. If you haven't been here for 10 generations, you're not one of us, kind of thing. So she's gossiped about, and she actually realizes that society in London, where you've got the kind of upper tier and the lower tier and the bottom tier, is exactly the same in a village, because you've got the squire who runs the show, you've got the peasants and the tenants who touch their forelock to the squire. Even if the squire treats them really badly, they still kind of perpetuate this bad behavior by bowing down to the squire. And Juliet kind of looks at this, and she actually has this sort of massive revelation that actually society is fundamentally grossly unfair. So she starts to champion the downtrodden, but she's still gossiped about in the village. And then their kind of eyes meet over a pulpit. The only person who actually understands her and really sees beyond this dodgy widow to the kind of kind soul beneath is the local vicar.
Oh, wow.
Andrew Styles. And he's second son of an earl. He's followed his calling by joining the church. His brother Robert is like a total rake. He's got countless mistresses. He's very, very sophisticated, very experienced, whereas Andrew kind of doesn't know his way around the bedroom, shall we say. He's like a total innocent, but he falls for this young woman who's just turned up in the village. He's having a crisis with his faith because he joined the church because he wanted to do good in society. But he's actually beholden to the squire, who says, no, if you don't write the kind of sermons that I want you to write, I'm going to speak to the bishop about you and have you taken away, because this is not what I want you to do. So he's still beholden to this society. So he's having a bit of a crisis, and he sees this woman who kind of comes into the village and shakes things up a bit. But he remembers the young woman who ran away to the village a couple of years before, who actually is Juliet's sister. And he fell in love with that woman.
No way.
Slightly pining for her, but she then ended up being picked up with her duke and having a happy ending. But he's aware of what happens to this other young woman. So although he's falling for Juliet, he does say to her, look, I forgive all sin apart from one. There is one person in the world who I will never forgive, who I will always hate, and that is the evil sister of Eleanor, who came to the village.
No.
Because Juliet realizes, oh, blimey, that's me.
Oh, man.
That's the situation they're in. So she's like thinking, yeah, if he finds out, that's it, game over, because that's the one person in the world he can't forgive.
Oh, man. Oh. I mean, come on, man. My heart is already all. We haven't even started reading yet. No. That is such a huge arc for a character to have to overcome too, especially if you've been taking the readers with you the whole entire time, and now they have to find her sympathetic enough to want her to get her happily ever after.
Yeah, she appears in, it's either like book 1 or book 2 of the series. You kind of see her trotting around the balls of London being a total stinker. So and it's kind of gradually get more and more and more of her. Now this is her story. And I love writing characters who are like totally antagonistic and do really bad things, and then try and redeem them by giving them then their story and saying, actually, this is why she was badly behaved. So we'll see if it works, because quite a few of my readers have said, I really hate Juliet, she's horrible.
Well, maybe we could talk a little bit about that, since we have a little bit of time left for the rest of the time. And Shana, you had a character too that's kind of a not your normal stereotypical heroine, and Jillian's hero must have done something awful for his heroine to want to divorce that fast after just a year and a bit. So how do you handle a character that is not going to be, that the audience is not going to be sympathetic to, that readers are not going to instantly fall in love? How do you show them the parts of those characters that make them emotionally invested?
That's a good question. For me, my heroine, whose name is also Kitty, short for Catherine with a K, it was difficult. There was times that I was writing her, and she's a pretty big character in the first book of the series. The second book does a recap, and so if you haven't read the first one, you can. All my books are standalones, but you definitely get the best experience if you read the first book, The Duchess Takes a Lover, and then pick up this one. But she's quite unlikable. There was even times I was writing her, and I'm very character driven, not plot driven. And she would say something and I would say, oh, what a bee. Like, that is very rude. And how are we going to come back from this, Kitty? Like, now you're going to be the main character of your own book. And people aren't going to like you. So it is difficult, but I think sometimes, not necessarily, it can be easier to write the super sweet, likable, innocent, joyful character. I know for me, it's easier to write those. But I did challenge myself quite a bit with this series to kind of go out of my comfort zone and write much more layered, more complicated characters. Because people are like that in real life, whether we're talking about people now or we're talking about people back in, Regency era England. So I have honestly already gotten a couple of reviews, which I was expecting, that said, like the writing, but just couldn't get behind the heroine. She was a tough character and I didn't like her, which that's fair. She's not for everybody. But I think at the end, her character arc was, at least for me writing it, a lot more meaningful than a character who starts off at the beginning with all of these already amazing qualities. And all they have to do is find true love.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Regency in particular, where the heroines tend to be a little bit younger, kind of lends itself to that Grumpy Sunshine thing where she's the innocent, light, and seeing more in-depth women, more layered women with more of a story is interesting.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Emily, you were nodding along with the character-driven part.
Yes, I tend to write more character-driven novels. As long as when I'm writing, it's like there's no plot going on here, but actually there's an awful lot of character growth. And I just love having characters totally redeem themselves and totally show their side of the story. And every villain is kind of a hero of their own story. So you just need to show their point of view. Certainly with Julia, even when she was behaving really badly in the earlier books, I was giving hints that actually she was deeply unhappy. There was something that was causing her to behave like that, but I didn't actually show it until it was her story. But yeah, I just love character-driven novels. I love to see people grow, and I love seeing heroes who look totally irredeemable on the surface actually then redeeming themselves and having a big long grovel at the end. I do like
a good grovel. We love a good grovel. That's the best. Shana, what about you?
I just think that it's harder for readers to when they have a heroine who has to be redeemed than a hero, because when I've written books where you have a kind of unlikable heroine, even if she then redeems herself, I've always gotten to the feedback, oh, I don't like her, but you can have a really awful hero who's a complete villain, and then they are much more able to forgive him. So I think it's tricky. And I agree completely with Emily that it has to be, the reader has to understand why they're doing what they did. And when I was writing about Kitty, I tried to look back at the Shakespearean play and say, what hints is he giving for why she's behaving this way? Well, I mean, he doesn't really give any. I mean, there's a little bit, maybe she's jealous of her sister, but he doesn't really develop that character very much. And so, then I had to kind of come up, well, yeah, maybe she is jealous of her sister, but that can't be the whole reason. I mean, that would be not very redeeming, so there has to be a reason that she is behaving this way. And I think once the reader can really understand, oh, if I might act like that if I was in that position too, then I think that they can forgive them for whatever past misdeeds.
Yeah, it's interesting that you called out the difference in genders though, because I think that's so true. It's like we actually like heroes that are damaged and bad and flawed and like the bad boy rakish Duke guys, but we don't often cut our heroines the same kind of slack. I wonder if that is because we empathize more with or we put ourselves more in the POV of the heroines. I mean, we don't. I don't
know, but it'll be interesting to see the feedback and what Emily hears, and even Jillian too, what they get from readers, if the readers are able to get past that, or if it's still an issue.
I always think about Downton Abbey and how awful Mary was, and how much I still wanted her to have good things happen to her. And Edith was awful sometimes too. So,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, they were all.
I really felt for Edith. I was rooting for Edith all the way till the end.
Yeah, I know. I got in an argument with my oldest about when I guess he was in high school, and they would watch with me about the giving her child away, and I realized I was arguing on the wrong side of single parenthood. And I needed to stop because that was not where I wanted to be. Maybe you have thoughts about irredeemable characters or characters that you have to put a little bit more intention behind the backstory to get people to
villains. I mean, the villain's great. An irredeemable villain is always great. But I always, sometimes, not always, but sometimes I think when I've got a villain, I've actually got to quite like him, and I think I could make him into a hero. And sometimes I do, but usually I can't find quite the right story for him, and I keep itching to go back to him. So yeah, there's a definite attraction in a villain who seems irredeemable, and trying to make him so. Same with heroines to some extent, but I think you may be right that there's a double standard there for readers, because you don't want to write a book that is not appealing to your readers. So if they don't like a heroine, because probably they do identify more with the women in the story, then yeah, it's slightly trickier to pull off, I think. But I don't see why it shouldn't be. I think there's room for all of them in there.
Well, and I loved what Emily said about villains thinking that they're the heroes in their own story too, because then so much more layered and less flat and less, just overtly evil, because they believe their actions are for good. Even Thanos thought he was the hero, so he was terrible. So. Awesome. Well, we talked a little bit about character-driven stories. Do you all of you generally get your characters first? Is that how the story comes to you, or do you find? I know Mary with the mystery driving the series this time, and the romance being kind of the secondary slow burn. Do you get the plot ahead of time, or are your characters still pulling the story?
I started with the characters for the series, and once I had them, then for the subsequent books, they've just sort of grown in the story. But yes, I had to sit down and basically plot out all the stories individually as they've come up, and I still don't know exactly how it's going to end, to be honest. But it just depends how it all rolls. But yeah, I start usually with the characters and then move on to the plot.
I think as a writer, not knowing exactly how everything is going to wrap up is one of the things that keeps you in the story and engaged yourself, so that you can work.
Yeah, definitely to some extent. Though I don't know about you guys, but I find I move faster when I actually know what's going on. I can write much faster rather than having to sit and think, where am I going with this? So there's definitely an advantage to plotting properly before you begin. I've just never quite got the hang of it.
What about the rest of you?
I'm an obsessive plotter. I'll start with the initial idea. I will start off with the characters and what's kind of keeping them apart and how they might overcome it. But then I'll write out the plot in probably meticulous detail. But I still won't really know how to get to the end. I'll know what the end is, but I won't know kind of in gory detail how to get to the end. But then when I write it, like the character stuff just comes.
Yeah.
It's I don't really plan it. It just kind of happens, and then another kind of. I mean, it sounds quite pretentious. All the characters will do what they want, but they do. It just I suddenly find I'm writing in one direction. It's like, no, I never thought I was going to do that. But the characters have just led me in that direction. So yeah, it tends to be character driven when I write it. But I do plot everything out meticulously, because yes, as Mary said, I think if I didn't plot, I'd just sit there with a blank page and go, what am I going to do? So I need some kind of destination.
Yeah. What about you, Jillian?
Yeah, I do not. I can't plot. I can't do outlines, which my editor is probably upset about, because I would make less mistakes with my timelines. I don't know. I just very character driven. I dream up my characters first. I know by the end of the book, they have to have a happily ever after. And generally, if I'm doing a series, I kind of focus on my theme, which again, for this series, Ladies of Seduction, is they're already married and they're unhappy and what has gone wrong or what never went right. But for example, for this book, The Lady Courts a Marquess, I got halfway through and I told my husband, I came down and I like poured myself a glass of wine. And I was like, they hate each other. This isn't going to work. I have to start over. It's not good. But I kind of, or they finagled and worked it out. And I think it actually ended up being a good thing because especially when you're writing romance as a genre, right? We know that we have a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or a woman, however it goes. And they have some differences, something happens, but at the end, they always fall in love. Like that, it has to have a happily ever after by a lot of romances standards. And I know by Dragonblade standards. So I think having that for the reader, especially if I have it as the author, where you're in the middle of the book and you're just like, this is not going to work out. For me, I know I like to read books like that because it just makes it a little bit more intriguing. How is this really going to come together? What is going to have to happen other than, oh, here's a couple small hurdles here and there and lots of flirting. And then there's the happily ever after.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that there's anything in those books. I like those too, but
I do like the plausibility of a more complicated, scenarios.
Right.
Awesome. Shana, what about you?
I also don't plot. I just usually sit down and start writing, but I don't think I am as character driven. I tend to have plots where a lot happens. I have a lot of adventure in my books, a lot of plot generally moves the story, and then the characters sort of have to react to the plot a lot of times. So, I mean, for example, in 21 Days with the Lion, it starts off with she's being abducted, so how does then that's how I start. I didn't know anything else. I was just like, okay, she's going to be abducted, and how does she react to that? And then that's kind of how I get to know what she's like, although I had an idea from the inspiration. And then I also knew, like, okay, I wanted to see what I could make happen in 21 days. I wanted to give it a timeline to kind of see what I could have happen in 21 days. So that was where I started with that. And I just write and see what happens.
Well, we're glad that you write because it gives us plenty of things to read. So, ladies, it has been a delight to talk to you this week. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'll make sure I put the links to all of your books in the comments, and also the link to the anthology, A Duke by Any Other Name, is releasing this week as well, so that you can grab those if you haven't gotten them already. You want to get your Dragonblade books on pre-order or release, they're the best deal then, but if you don't grab them then, you can always read them in Kindle Unlimited. So no barrier to entry. There's no reason not to. So. All right, ladies, thanks again for taking the time. I really appreciate it.